Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television. Now, we're still talking about the Ebola virus disease. And in Sierra Leone's Daru district, the remote village of Njala Gema is one of the worst hit by the Ebola virus. Our colleague at the VOA, Adam Bales, reports that since May this year, more than half of the 200 people who live there have been infected with the Ebola virus disease, killing 61 of them in just 8 weeks.
This remote village sits on a single road. James Bayonne is a social worker from Daru who now helps support what is left of this devastated community. He says Ebola wiped out entire families.
You have a lot of orphans here. Which mother and father have passed away. They are now left to just foster parents. All these children are left with their grandfather. The mother died, another relative. They are all left with the grandfather.
65-year-old Arabic teacher Fode Kone has been left to take care of 31 children. 18 are orphans.
Many of the children are here to learn Arabic, but some of the children are victims of Ebola. They were here with me when their parents died, and now they have no other place to go. So I had to embrace them, to take care of them and cater for them. But to earn a living is really difficult sometimes. It is hard.
With the failing health system, many people like Fode are left with little support. James says when Ebola struck this village, they were cut off. Nobody came to help.
Everybody abandoned them. As long as you say you're hailing from Jala, people abandon you, so it's not very easy for them.
Solomon Jawad lives with his family on the edge of the village. He survived Ebola, but lost many of his family members.
This whole house, if you are looking at the whole house, it was about 14 people. This house, it was 14 people, this whole house. 14 people who died. And these 3 people, we are just like brothers.
This room has been locked since his twin brother's death. Solomon says he was afraid to go for treatment. The room is all but untouched. Pictures of family still hang on the walls. Cigarettes his brother sold sit on a shelf. Solomon says he was the last person to die in the village. James says Ebola has touched every part of this community.
There is no house here in this town that was not infected, whether direct or indirectly, we are affected.
When Ebola came to Jala, many people ran away, frightened of those infected. Baby Bandu was found locked in an empty house with her sister, who later died of Ebola. Veronica Kamara says Bandu is just 18 months old.
They were in the village, both of them, herself and her elder sister, who was 7 years old. They were abandoned in the village, in a house, where there were only 2 of them in that house. Nobody cares, nobody feeds them. And they were brought here by contract tracers to this center.
Veronica says she has tracked down relatives of the child, but they rejected her. Even now, many communities are struggling to recover from the devastation of the Ebola epidemic.
Now, despite calls for the United States to ban travelers from countries most affected by the Ebola virus disease, the Obama administration insists that it is not taking that thought into consideration in the least. Instead, American officials say they will consider new ways to curb the outbreak after the first case of Ebola was detected in the United States last week.
The United States continues to be assessing and reassessing the procedures that are in place to safeguard the traveling public around the globe, but also the American public here at home. So we feel good about the measures that are already in place. A travel ban is not something that we're currently considering. The reason for that is simply, I think it's twofold. The first is there already is a multi-layered screening protocol in place in our transportation system. There are extensive screening measures on the ground in West Africa where this outbreak has occurred to ensure that individuals that have symptoms of Ebola, in other words, are contagious, cannot board international aircraft. There's guidelines and guidance and training that has been given to flight crews to ensure that they are aware of what the symptoms of Ebola are and can spot individuals who may be suffering from the symptoms of Ebola. There was an incident over the weekend that I know got some public attention about an aircraft that landed at Newark raising concerns there may be an individual on board who had symptoms of Ebola. Now, it turned out that this individual did not actually have Ebola.
I'm now being joined by our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, in studio right now to tell us more about the Ebola virus disease. Amarachi, thank you for joining us on The World Today. Now, you were in the United States last week when this virus broke out. Based on what you saw and based on people you interacted with, do you believe that the U.S. is prepared to deal with the virus?
That's a really tough question, because authorities will tell you that they actually had a medical strategy in place and were prepared. I mean, this is the United States who has been offering help to other West African countries. Remember, President Barack Obama promised to send 4,000 troops to Sierra Leone and to Liberia to help build mobile clinics and so on. So it came quite unexpectedly, I think, in the U.S. because, I mean, the U.S. has, one of the strongest health systems that we know of. I mean, hospitals are well equipped and so on. So there was actually, a system in place to help identify if anybody did come in with Ebola. But personally, going through the airports in the U.S., anyone knowing I was coming from Nigeria, a country that had been impacted by Ebola, there were no specific or special treatments given, or no screening or anything that we had to go through to get past security and all of that. So I would say they never really thought it would ever happen to them. That's the impression I got.
I like what you just said about never thinking that it would happen to them. So now that it's happened in the U.S. and yesterday we also understood that it happened in Spain as well, is this a wake-up call to countries around the world that if it could happen in the West African region and in Spain and the United States, it can happen anywhere else?
I think the fact that it's shown up in the U.S. and the first case of Ebola outside of West Africa shows how global the problem really is. I mean, it's no longer restricted to West Africa. And I think it's not the first time the world has experienced Ebola, but not on this scale. This is actually much bigger than what we've seen in the past. Fewer people here and there, especially in Africa, not in West Africa. It's the first time it's shown up in West Africa, but in other parts of Africa, especially in the DRC, we've seen a case of Ebola springing up from time to time. So it gives it a more global outlook when it shows up, in Spain and also in the U.S. And probably this time it would help, scientists and lab technicians and so on, lab scientists to eventually, produce a drug that will cure Ebola, because this is more than 20 years we're talking about since the first outbreak of the Ebola virus disease, and we still haven't had a cure. There's still no vaccine. There are no drugs that actually treat Ebola. If you have a strong immune system, it really helps, because the body is the only organ right now that is known to fight Ebola.
Well, Amarachi, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on The World Today. Wow. I've been speaking with our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani. She's been telling us more about the Ebola virus disease being a global threat and not just a West African threat.